Well, the international situation is getting very, very serious, and there's a good chance of an Israeli strike against Iran. I thought it would be interesting to go back in time in this history video to when the world almost blew itself up, 1962, in November, the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was absolutely the most dangerous time we'd ever lived through. And at the time, none of us, including the people in the Kennedy administration, knew how dangerous it really was. They had no idea how close they came to blowing up the world. This began when Khrushchev, the Soviet leader, decided that he couldn't build enough long-range rockets to really be a credible threat to the United States. So what he decided to do was to put his missiles in Cuba, where his intermediate range missiles could threaten pretty much all of the United States. And he did it in secret. He shipped them over. He denied he was putting missiles in Cuba. Kennedy warned against it. He went ahead anyway. And by the time we discovered it, the missile installation was pretty far along. They weren't operational yet, but they were getting close to operational, a matter of days or weeks before they could have actually launched from there. And then the Kennedy administration had a tough question. What do we do? Do we do a strike, an airstrike, they called it a surgical strike, to demolish the Soviet missiles in Cuba? Or do we declare a blockade of Cuba and stop anything new from showing up? And the majority of the cabinet and the advisors said, do a surgical strike. What the heck good is a blockade going to do? The missiles are already there. And we were going to proceed with the strike. Now, had we done that strike, so-called surgical strike, it would have caused World War III. We would probably not be here right now, because there were 50,000 Soviet troops in Cuba. We had no idea there were that many. We thought there were maybe a couple of dozen. 50,000 of them that were installing the missiles, putting it together, securing all of that. An airstrike against those missiles would have killed tens to 10,000 Soviet soldiers. It would have forced a general war between the US and the Soviet Union that could easily, and most likely would, have escalated into a nuclear war. Boy, we came close. Ultimately, Bobby Kennedy saved the day by saying a secret strike is not what the United States does. We were the victims of Pearl Harbor. We don't do that kind of thing. We're going to start with a blockade. They called it a quarantine. And then if that doesn't work, we'll escalate, and we can always do the surgical strike later. So the US set up a quarantine, a blockade, and the Soviets had a ship going to the United States, going to Cuba. And the real question was, would they sink the Soviet ship or intercept it, or would it turn back? And the US spotted the ship, told the ship, we have you in our submarine sights, turn around. And the ship radioed the Kremlin for instructions, and the instructions came back, turn around. What had happened was, behind the scenes, Bobby Kennedy got together with Dobrynin, the Soviet ambassador, and said, in secret, without anyone knowing about it, we will agree to dismantle our bases in Turkey if you dismantle your bases in Cuba. But you can't say anything about it. We'll just go ahead and do it as soon as this crisis is over. And the Soviets said yes. They sold it to their own Politburo with that in mind. And we really escaped a nuclear war. It's worth noting that because of that, Khrushchev was thrown out of office a year later, and Brezhnev took over because he blinked in the Cuban Missile Crisis and decided not to blow up the world. But boy, how close we came. Thanks.